An intro. Either way, I've been dungeon mastering DMing for around 4 years now. I've been doing it for a decent amount of time, and I've picked up on a couple things, learned a couple things that just kind of bother me in general when I see either newer people start doing it or people they've been playing for a while and then they jump into it like, I want a DM, and they miss a couple things that kind of just go way over their head and you just completely miss it. This is a video that has 5 of my biggest pieces of advice for people who are new to DMing. Not necessarily those who are just starting to play the game, but people who have been playing as a player for a while and want to try DMing. This is more the video for you. These tips kind of apply assuming you know how to play the game a bit. They're not rules and stuff like that. That's not what this video is. They're 5 things that I basically picked up on that I think really help you become a better dungeon master and really learn how to play a lot better. Tip number 1 is take constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is basically a valid or reasoned piece of criticism to somebody. Usually a bit of good and usually a bit of bad criticism is mixed in there. The reason why I say this is super important, and of all the tips listed here, is probably the most important thing that you can learn, is because time and time again I see new DMs who start these awesome campaigns that have lots of potential, and then a little issue shows up. It might be pacing, it might be difficult encounters, it might be the DM not listening to players, and when players bring this to the DM's attention to try to make the game better that they're enjoying, the DM doesn't listen. And when those come issues, the DM gets mad and the game just falls apart because the players just wanted a better experience. As a DM, you should always be trying to better yourself and your craft, and make the game a much more fun experience for everyone involved, including yourself and the players. By seeking out constructive criticism from either your players or people outside of the game, you're able to get information that you might not otherwise be able to come up with yourself. Things like, maybe do this for the encounter instead of that because you know for a fact they won't like it. And you should seek this out as a DM. Don't let them come to you first. Seek it out first and try to improve yourself without even having to ask. Going to places like Discord servers or subreddits, or even people just outside of the game if you have DM friends, to get advice on what you should do. Finally, accept that bad sessions happen. I mean, they happen to everyone, they happen to me, and they probably happen to people who've been doing it much longer than I have. And the best thing to do as a DM isn't to defend your craft, defend what you made, but to accept the fact that it happened and turn around, examine what happened, ask the players, look at it yourself, look through your notes, see what went wrong, and then try to better it next session instead of just trying to let it say, bad session, whatever, let's move on. No, move on, but improve what you've made to make it better. Tip number 2, DM and player communication. D&D is a cooperative game, and I don't just mean that by the players of the party working together to solve your problem. I mean that from the perspective of the players and the dungeon master, working together to create an experience that they both can enjoy. As a dungeon master, your role is to create something that is engaging and fun for the players. They're giving away their allotted time to play your world, and the last thing you want is to make something that they won't like or something that they're not interested in. In the Dungeon Master's Guidebook, the one right behind me actually, on page 6 there's a little blurb talking about types of players. As it's called it there, know your players. The archetypes that it lists there are acting, exploring, instigating, fighting, optimizing, problem solving, and storytelling. This list isn't perfect, but it really kind of gives you a basic idea of what type of players exist out there. If you have a mostly combat-oriented player who made their character to the best of their ability to be this awesome build that's a kobold murdering machine and from the ground up has been designed like this, and the character personality side has fallen a little bit behind, you don't want to give them a heavily RP-based campaign or heavily RP-based session. However, at the same time, you don't want someone's perfectly crafted character who has an amazing backstory and amazing personality full of charisma to be stuck in a session full of combat. Don't assume what archetype a player is. Ask them and actually talk about it. If you assume, you're just setting yourself up for failure for when you find out that the person who you thought was a combat killing machine is actually more of a combat and acting style player who really enjoys both sides and wants both aspects of the game. Talk to your players about what they want to see, since they're going to be enjoying the game from the player perspective, and should be as much part of the campaign process about the flow and what happens in terms of combat and story for what they want to see, as much as you are, because they're the ones who are allotting their time to actually play it. Tip number 3 is have a real session 0, and I'm not talking just to meet with individual players, see what their backstories are, see who their characters are, and create this prologue and stuff. No, don't do that. You can do that if you want, but also have a real legitimate session 0. But a session 0 is basically this prequel, preset meeting to the campaign, where you discuss the expectations, the rules, and what exactly is going to happen in the campaign, and maybe some additional character setups and character backstory details if not discussed already. However, the real reason to have a session 0 is to start that ball rolling of communication with your players. Talk about what they want to see and what you want to see from them. How I personally run a session 0 is normally something like this. I start off with introductions about who I am and some simple backstory about myself and D&D, along with basic scheduling about when I'm available and how long my sessions normally run. After that, I allow the players to do the same thing, introduce themselves, and maybe introduce their character at this point as well. This allows the meeting to feel a bit less meeting-like and a bit more fun instead of just this nails the meeting that's crazy in all details. This is more something that's fun and engaging for everyone to do. Maybe to get yourself and the players to be more themselves and get to know each other and become friends. After the introductions, I like to go into the rules for the game. Things like what happens if you miss a session, my expectations for how them to act, and to tell them that they need to inform me if they're going to miss a session, at least a day in advance if possible. After I go through my rules and expectations of this campaign and even sessions, I then give the opportunity for the players to do the same thing. For them to talk about what they want to see from the game, from me, and maybe other players. Things like helping each other out, not backseat gaming, etc., etc. Really to make this a group effort on what the game should flow like. So if a player has something that they don't like, they can make that rule then and there and set the expectation to all the other players instead of having to bring it up over and over and over again. By doing this back and forth motion, you set the groundwork for that communication between players and DM to really set what this game is going to look like on every side, every aspect. From the rules outside of the game to even in-game things like not metagaming, etc. That can be done then and there without having to tell your players constantly ages ago, like a ruling on how you do something. After doing this back and forth, it gives the DMs a feel for what the players want from the game as well. For instance, if a player who's playing a fighter says, I would like to see combat at least once per session, you can get that written down in notes and start prepping for it later on in the game. And then likewise, if a player says, I want to see more RP with low combat, you can work that in there as well to get the best of both sides so both players are happy. I then personally like to play out almost an entire full session, almost like a prequel for the game. It sets up this fun, exciting world for the players and something to be excited for next week, instead of just having a meeting and leaving and maybe people aren't feeling it and dip from the game right away. In this case, they get a feel for your DMing style and really want to stick around if they enjoy it. Tip number 4, pacing is key. And let me repeat that, pacing is really, really important. Let's imagine, for instance, that you're a player in a new campaign, and the session is going pretty decent, and I would say overall well, but then certain issues start popping up over and over. Things like every couple seconds there's pauses, there's a new encounter, difficult problem every 15 minutes, and you just in general have no idea where you're supposed to go. And by the time that 3 hours ends, you've been playing a gacha game on your phone for the last hour and a half. When a session's pacing is all over the place or just slow, it takes players out of the game and makes their enjoyment go from potentially a lot to absolutely nothing. Unfortunately, pacing isn't just an easy fix where I can just tell you to design your session like this and do this as follows, as that doesn't exist. There's no perfect example of how to run one. It's something that you have to figure out yourself over time and with practice. However, there are a few things that I can advise you and stuff that I've picked up over the years of playing that I've learned that make writing sessions a bit more entertaining and really help the pacing along a lot. When you're sitting down to write your session or sessions, take the approach of writing them with a beginning, middle, and end. That it sounds obvious, but To put it in more perspective, write them with the idea of, at this session, we'll have achieved this goal, hopefully. And I'm not talking about railroading your players in a straight line. I'm talking more, set it that you would like to see this goal achieved at this point. And the session showcases that in terms of what's going on. By using this beginning, middle, and end structure, you really create this sense of progression during your game, instead of just, here's a world, do stuff, bye, have fun, peace out. It really gives you a sense of accomplishment on the player side of things. Let's look at an example of a session with pretty good pacing. The players find themselves traveling from a major city to another large city multiple days away. Start the session off slowly with the players waking up at the end and finishing up some things that they may have done in the last session, whether it be quest lines or even shopping. Maybe throw a couple interesting NPCs in there at the continental breakfast for them to talk to. After they finish up messing around doing the RP, doing the conversations, doing the potential quest lines or shopping, have them leave the city. And once they do, describe the environment as they're leaving and walking around, and then urge them or let them have an opportunity to RP for a while. But not too long, and whatever you do, don't interrupt them unless you absolutely have to. It's really something that players enjoy doing, and interrupting it will be a downer on your fun. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. At this point in the session, it's time to throw something interesting in, another attention getter that really grabs the party. And we do this through an encounter. In this example, the party spots a man sitting in a wooden chair in the middle of the road, and they're immediately thinking to themselves, whoa, what is this guy? Is he a threat? Is it a merchant? Is it some person who's going to attempt to kill us? Is he friendly? Is he a potential party member? Is he a mimic? All of these things are going through the player's head, and they might stop to discuss it. Finally, something interesting has happened that really gets them back in the session. After the encounter, the party continues to travel for a little bit. However, don't focus too much on that. Maybe throw in another encounter or two, but don't kill the pacing by throwing too many things. Let them have some time to RP between hand, or just skip around a bit to make things a little bit faster paced. Towards the last third of this session, the players arrive at the city. Give them a ton of different hooks to go after, whether it be shopping, quests, interesting characters, or locations. Provide all of those to them then. However, you also have your main hook, the reason why they're going there, and allow them to go after that as well, but don't force it down their throats and let them go at their own pace. The rest of the session is in the player's hands. They can go through the main quest or potentially do some side content or some random thing that you didn't think of that's completely unexpected that you have to improv. This isn't an example of how to run the perfect session. It's more how to run something that could be mundane or boring and make it a bit more entertaining. One of the main reasons why pacing in a session can feel very dull or boring is if the DM is looking at stat blocks or notes or some other piece of paperwork every 2 seconds, and it creates an awkward silence if nobody is talking. This awkward silence or dead air causes sessions to feel longer than they actually are, or just overall really slow. Because you could be in combat and something is happening, you're high engaged into it, you do something, and instead of the response like that, it's this is what happens. It's very slow and feels wrong almost, as if the world has to load and wait for a response instead of just happening straight out. To fix dead air, what I've found is if someone is almost always talking, whether it be you describing how something is or a player RPing describing their attack, vice versa, it really makes things look a lot smoother and sound a lot cooler, and makes things sound more engaging and really like they're actually happening. At the end of the day, don't sweat it. Pacing is something that takes a lot of practice, and in order to help yourself out, talking to your players about what they want to see and what they think would improve the session really helps. Tip number 5 is have fun. What I mean by have fun is make something that you find entertaining, or run sessions that you find fun. Don't create something for your players or just because you think it sounds cool or will entertain them. Make something that will entertain you that you find fun. The last thing you want to do as a DM is make content that you don't like. By doing that, you're setting yourself up for failure and sessions that the players probably won't enjoy. If your heart isn't in the project or isn't in the game that you're doing, that'll reflect and the players might lose interest or lack care. Because if you certainly don't care, why should they? The same goes for making sure your players are having fun and enjoying what's going on. If they aren't enjoying the campaign, talk to them and find out why not. It could be about pacing, it could be just because they're not feeling it. And get the feedback and change it to try to make the campaign something that they'll enjoy more. D&D should be fun for everyone involved, not just the DM and not just the player. Everyone at that table should be enjoying it and having a great time. The biggest takeaway from this is D&D shouldn't feel like a chore for anybody, you or the players. It should be something that you want to show up and want to take place in, because if you don't, why keep playing? So yeah, that's the 5 tips I have for being a better Dungeon Master, I guess, or the biggest things that have helped me. It sounds kind of weird, I know, for some of them. Ignore the screaming. Overall, being a DM takes a lot of practice. You might not get it on your first game, or you might not get it on your second game, but eventually you'll learn it. And if you keep enjoying it and keep loving it, you'll improve and become a better Dungeon Master. It's not something that happens overnight. And be understanding of that. Finding players who are willing to play in a new DM's game is also a big factor. If they're willing to help you out and help you improve, it makes a much better experience for both people, especially if they understand that you're new to it. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is something completely different for this channel. If you enjoyed it, comment below, I guess, tell me what you thought, and what DMing tips you personally have, or maybe something that you'd like more elaboration on. I'm more than willing to help people out and give them advice if you need to, because I get like 2 comments anyway, so I don't give a crap. So yeah, just let me know what you think, drop a like. Yeah, that's all I got.